Young Adulthood, a PowerPoint presentation presented by Montanique Nixon, Rakita Taylor, Megan Jerome, Crystal Castell, and Tremaine Willingham. Here's our agenda. We'll have a music pictorial on young adulthood, demographics, theoretical perspectives, challenges of developmental group, family peer intimate relationships, social institution structures, practice recommendations, future research directions, and last, we'll have a list of references used throughout the presentation. Here you can take a look at our musical pictorial on young adulthood. Okay, so yes, the international legal age associated with young adulthood is at 18 years old. However, are 18-year-old adults mentally mature enough to take on huge responsibilities, make independent decisions, comprehend, think, and process the world around them? Or are people in their late 20s and 30s more experienced in life? Do they understand their emotions and how to control them, or do they know what it takes to start off a career and family? Typical chronological ages associated with young adulthood are 22 to 34 or 18 to 34 years old. Young adult ages 18 to 25 agree that they have not yet reached their adulthood. A majority of people in their 30s do agree they reached their adulthood. Many would think that when a person leaves off to college to live in the dorm rooms or move into an apartment with some friends, that's their entry into young adulthood. However, the increase in 25 to 34-year-olds living at home started way before the recent recession and has continued beyond it. It has been reported that in 2005, there was 53% and 46% of men and women aged 18 to 24-year-old living at home with their parents. And that percentage has went up from 59% to 50% of women and men living at home with their parents in 2011. Men the ages of 25 and 34 living home rose from 14% in 2005 to 19% in 2011, and from 8 and 10% over the period for women. In other countries like Japan, 64% of unmarried emerging adult men aged 25 and 29 reside with their parents, and 80% of unmarried emerging adult women reside with their parents. With education in young adulthood, approximately half of educationally disadvantaged 18 to 24-year-olds have not completed high school, moved on to college, or moved on to advanced vocational training. The record here shares the nation's younger adult ages 25 to 29, 90% has finished at least at high school, and another record share of 63% has completed at least some college. The numbers are increasingly rising amongst women ages 25 to 34 years old with some type of college education to get married. But for the women with a high school education or less, the numbers are declining. The sample over here to your right shows 60% of young adults in some type of romantic relationship in their early 20s, with 16% married, 17% cohabiting, and 27% dating. When it comes to young adulthood and employment, less than 78% of people aged 20 to 34 either have jobs or are looking for work. Studies do show more occupational instability during the ages 18 to 25 as compared with age 30. In 2000, the United States had the lowest non-employment rate for 25 to 34-year-olds, and by 2011, America had one of the highest youth non-employment rates. As of 2012, just 54% of Americans ages 18 to 24 currently have jobs, and more than a third of adults aged 18 to 34 say they have gone back to school to avoid a tough labor market.
In our textbook, 3 frameworks regarding young adulthood are discussed: Erikson's psychosocial theory, Levinson's theory of life structure, and Arnett's emerging adulthood. The first theory is Erikson's psychosocial theory, which has 8 stages or a crisis for the person to solve. Young adults fall into the stage of intimacy versus isolation. This is a time when individuals move from identity fragmentation, confusion, and exploration of adolescence into more intimate engagement with significant others, according to Hutchinson citing Erikson on page 276 of our text. The question for people during this time is, will I love or will I be alone? Cultural shifts in communication and expectations have somewhat altered the timing of this question. Globally, the median age for first marriage has risen. This is due to many factors, including women putting off getting married in order to focus on their career, and also not being able to find partners who would like to settle down. Social networking has also changed a great deal, particularly over the last few decades. With the advent of sites like Facebook, MySpace, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Vine, which can appear as if other people in young adults' lives are moving on and up while the person in question feels rather stagnant in life. This can lead to depression and even suicide. The goal for this stage in Erikson's theory is love. A person who is not able to properly connect with someone during this time while preserving their individuality can end up feeling disconnected and alone. The second theory is Levinson's theory of life structure, which is based on interviews with men about their adult experiences. Levinson did include women at a later date, according to Hutchinson, page 276. He compiled his research to come up with this concept of life structure. It is defined as the outcome resulting from specific decisions and choices made along the life course, which in such areas as relationships, occupation, and childbearing. According to Hutchinson, page 276 in the text, the novice phase of adulthood he considered to be between the ages of 17 and 33. The transition into adulthood begins at ages 17 to 22, with preliminary decisions being made about relationships, careers, and belief systems. By age 30, the person has transitioned into full adulthood and has made decisions that have a significant impact on the life course trajectory. The main focus for Levinson was on relationships, much like Erikson, and work. There are a number of mitigating factors in the decisions that people make during this time. Socioeconomic status, parental expectations, availability of interaction with adult role models, neighborhood conditions, and community and peer group pressures are just a few. Rumbutt argues that, as post-secondary educational attainment has become critical to social mobility for young adults, incarceration for men and early childbearing for women have emerged as turning points that can derail life course trajectories by disrupting educational and occupational opportunities, according to Rumbutt, page 1043. Social workers need to help explore resources for overcoming any negative factors or influences when dealing with young adults. Social workers are also there to help navigate any life roles that could be contending with one another. For example, renegotiating family and work responsibilities as parenthood approaches. Our third theory is Arnett's emerging adulthood. Arnett describes it as a developmental phase distinct from both adolescence and young adulthood. Hutchinson quoting Arnett, page 277 of the text. It occurs between the ages of 18 and 25 in most industrialized nations, with full transition made by the age of 30, similar to Levinson's theory. This theory, based on research where young people were asked whether they believed that they were adults. The majority of people 30 and over believed that they had achieved adulthood, whereas people 18 to 25 did not think they had. In Arnett's theory, adolescence is no longer the time for experimentation. Young adulthood now has that focus. People experiment with social and economic roles during this time. The goal at the end of this stage is to solidify role commitments. The emerging adults before their 30s are building careers and exploring options for work. People in their 30s are more likely to have stabilized in their career field and are growing in it. This is also a time for people to experiment in love and relationships. The first part in emerging adulthood is about a lack of commitment in social institutions. Young people are moving away from their families of origin and creating their own identities. Marriage has traditionally been the most significant marker of adulthood. However, that was recently replaced with financial independence and stability and responsibility for decision-making due to cultural shifts and expectations. Arnett also defines this time as having a crisis, much like Erikson, of default individualization versus developmental individualization. Default individualization is a pathway whereby adulthood transitions are defined by circumstance and situation, rather than by personal agency. Those that follow the developmental individualization pathway transition into adulthood by personal agency and make deliberate decisions in their intellectual, occupational, and psychosocial domains. It is also a concern in young adulthood that as the age of first marriage and childbearing has increased, this has created a shift in the care for elder members of the family. Young adults are often caught in a sandwich, caring for their young children and also caring for their grandparents and/or their parents. Contingent on when the elder family member begins to require care, this can make for a lot less time for emerging for the young adults. This would mean less time to experiment and explore options and may hinder separation from family of origin. This can also create less time to form separate family units and also make finances less stable.
Challenges of developmental group. Anxiety disorders affect 20% of adolescents, and depression as well is another mental health problem that affects adolescents. Anxiety disorders develop from complex set of risk factors including genetics, brain chemistry, personality, and life events. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the United States, affecting 40 million adults in the United States age 18 and older. Anxiety disorders are highly treatable, yet only about one-third of those suffering receive treatment. Studies show that emerging young adults between 16 and 24 years of age who suffer from a severe mental illness can lose greater than 25 years of their life expectancy. And also, cardiovascular disease is a major health problem that can form with young adults with mental illness. They have a higher rate of diabetes as well, overweight issues, high blood pressure, and many other conditions. The onset age of mental illness is 24 years of age, and 75% of young adults are affected at this age. Physical issues. Some of the physical issues that young adults face as they age would be changes in their vision, changes in endurance level, the metabolism slows down, muscle strength decreases, and obesity becomes a problem. Obesity is another form of malnutrition. Adequate nutrition and healthy eating will promote a healthy young adulthood and future as well. Type 2 diabetes can occur due to the lack of exercise, unmodified diets, and unmonitored blood sugar. 25.6 million of individuals who are 20 years of age or older develop diabetes. Adequate nutrition and healthy eating and physical exercise habits at this age are foundations for good health in young adulthood. Major diseases in young adulthood. Young adults make up the highest percentages among adults with sexually transmitted diseases, such as HIV and chlamydia. Young people from ages 15 to 24 years of age account for 40% of all new HIV infections, and majority that are affected are young African American males. Chlamydia is the most commonly reported STD in the United States. In 2009, young black males made up 65% of the diagnosed HIV cases among 13 to 24-year-olds. HIV disproportionately affects young gay, bisexual African American males. Chlamydia also is one of the number one highest commonly reported STDs from the CDC census. The risk among HIV is notably affecting young gay, bisexual men who sleep with other men, and also the Latino community are the most highest minority races and ethnicities.
The transition into adulthood is exciting and difficult. It can present new challenges when learning to find your independence outside of your family. The transition into adulthood is exciting and difficult. It can present new challenges when learning to find your independence outside of your family. At the age of 18, young adults begin to value their relationships with friends and family. They learn to become more responsible and invested in maintaining a healthy relationship. It is also during this time that having a job and forming a romantic attachment becomes priority. However, there are some young adults who experience life differently, such as those with developmental disabilities. They tend to experience less peer interaction and more parental interaction, while those in foster care tend to be more isolated and become self-reliant. According to Hutchinson, there are three parent-young adult relationships that tend to arise during this stage: the dependent relationship, independent relationship, and interdependent relationship. The precursor to establishing relationships in young adults stems from the healthy relationship with the mother, as well as the ability to resolve conflict in a healthy manner. This may cause difficulty for young adults in foster care. They have difficulty in developing meaningful relationships because they have learned to be hesitant and distrustful. Choosing a romantic partner is based on three emotional systems: lust, attraction, and attachment. During this stage, most young adults feel they have found their soulmate and are establishing a foundation of intimacy to build a relationship. According to Hutchinson, fostering intimacy requires reciprocal communication, developing trust and security, and commitment to one another, among other things. Traditionally, the intimate relationship that is established is a precursor to marriage. It is important for young adults at this stage to learn to live independently and to gain their own identity outside of the family. As a result of this, young adults usually attend college or join the workforce. Because the unemployment rate is so high, it is now important more than ever that young adults gain skills and knowledge that is needed to obtain a full-time job with good benefits. Since manufacturing and industry jobs have been on decline, service sector jobs such as teaching and nursing have increased. Therefore, it has become necessary for young adults to gain skills and talents as well as a degree. Young adults transitioning out of foster care, along with those that have developmental or emotional disabilities, are at a higher risk for dropping out of high school. Programs such as Job Corps and AmeriCorps have been established for these young adults and are geared toward education and occupational advancement. For those transitioning out of foster care, the government has established the Foster Care Independence Act as well as the John H. Foster Care Independence Program to extend its support until the age of 21.
In this section, we're going to be looking at practice recommendations for social workers in dealing with young adults. So in order to take a look at where we're going to go with practice recommendations and guiding young adults, it's important to take a look at risk and protective factors in the adult's life. And a risk factor is a personal or societal factor that can increase the likelihood of a problem occurring, while a protective factor is a personal and societal factor that can reduce or protect against a risk factor. So some examples of these in the text included under risk factors were low family income during infancy, poor reading achievement by age 10, problematic school behavior during adolescence, and adolescent health problems, while a protective factor could be something like parenting quality or socioeconomic status. According to the text, knowledge of risk and protective factors related to the adulthood transition can help social work assess young adult clients' current challenges, vulnerabilities, strengths, and potentials. The link below is to a YouTube video that does an excellent job in explaining risk and protective factors. So in this slide, we're going to be looking at implications for social workers according to our textbook. And according to Dimensions of Human Behavior, some of the implications for social workers include recognizing the social roles that adulthood brings that is different from young adulthood, as well as exploring an individual's cultural family values, expectations, and attitudes toward gender roles. This can help when working with young clients because it influences the way that they think and life structures. And it's also important to assess specific family, work, and community conditions as they pertain to the client's psychological and social well being. It's important to be aware of any caregiving role that the young adult may be in. And also, it's important to understand the ways that social systems promote or deter people from maintaining or achieving health and well being. So, in this slide, we're going to look at some practice recommendations. Some of these can include different therapy routes or different approaches that the social worker may take when working with young adults. The first one is going to be cognitive behavior therapy, and this helps the young adult to change negative styles of thinking and behavior that may contribute to the risk factor causing their situation. Then there's the interpersonal therapy, and this helps the young adult work through personal relationships that may be contributing to the risk factor. There's also the strength-based approach, and this is one of my favorites when working with clients because when you use this approach, you highlight the client's strengths, and this creates a positive relationship between the client and the practitioner because you're working on building those strengths. Now, a new trend in kind of approaching young adults has been this intrapersonal approach, and this is where you kind of focus on the young adult and themselves instead of their outside environment. And this helps the young adult create a sense of self-worth and self-awareness, and it helps the young adult focus on what they're feeling and their emotions. So in the previous slide, I had mentioned those 4 kind of just general approaches that you could take to apply to a young adult in really any phase of their life. You can apply that in an intervention stage or preventative stage. But here in this slide, we're going to take a look at a more structured approach, and this is going to be based off of research by Podesky and Mooney. And what they did was they did a strength-based cognitive behavioral therapy approach. And in this approach, in their research, they created a 4-step model that builds resilience in their clients. And it gives you the 4 different steps on how to build resilience, and we'll explain those later on. But just as an overview, cognitive behavioral therapy approaches have had a high degree of success in the treatment of a variety of difficulties, ranging from depression and anxiety disorders to chronic pain and sleep disorders. And that's why I think this approach is so valuable in working with young adults, because it ranges in a variety of different issues that you can work with a young adult and take this one general approach to any issue. So in this slide, we're going to take a look at the 4 steps in building resilience in clients that I had mentioned in the previous slide. So the first step is going to be to search for strengths. And the article defines strengths as strategies, beliefs, and personal assets used with relative ease that can promote the positive qualities one is trying to build. And in this case, you're trying to build resilience within your clients. So this leads us to our second step. And in that step, we're going to try to construct the individual's own personal model of resilience. And in the second step, the therapist or the social worker and the client co-create a personal model of resilience on the basis of the strengths that you identified in the first step. So then once you construct that personal model of resilience, you're going to then apply that personal model of resilience with your client. The client is asked to consider how it would help maintain resilience in areas of difficulty. So you and the client can write different common areas of challenges. And the focus of this discussion and on this step is to stay resilient in the face of difficulties rather than successes in overcoming them. And then finally, our 4th step in constructing this model of resilience is going to be to practice the resilience. During the final stage of the strength-based model, it's important for therapists and clients to devise a behavioral experiment to practice resilience. So this slide kind of breaks down the 4 steps that I mentioned in the previous slide. So the first step, as I mentioned, was strengths for the client. So you can look for strengths within positive, sustained activities. And this, when you're introducing these strengths, might introduce obstacles. But like I said, no two clients are the same. So every client is going to have a different types of strengths. And with that, there are many types of strengths. The second one would be conducting the personal model of resilience. And you can turn strengths into general strategies. And it's also very helpful to use the client's words because then the client is creating their own strength. And as practitioners, it's important to use images and metaphors to kind of help the client relate and imagine what we are planning and what their own strengths are. The third step is going to be to apply that PMR, which is short for the personal model of resilience. And that in that step, it's going to be important to identify the problem areas of resilience and then plan where you're going to use these strategies. And as practitioners, it's always important to focus on the resilience of the client and their progress and not so much necessarily the outcome. As long as the client is practicing the resilience, that's what's important. And that leads us into our next step and the final step, which is step number 4. This is going to be practice. So you can design behavioral experiments in which the client is going to have to practice that resilience. And when they start practicing resilience, they can start predicting the outcomes of their behaviors and starting to notify and make themselves more self-aware of the situation. Also, again, it's reiterating that there's many different types of strengths, so it's important to focus on the outcome of the resilience, not necessarily the outcome of the situation. So as the article went on, it kind of touched that strength-based approach and using the cognitive behavioral therapy is a 4-step approach for helping people build positive qualities. It posits that there are 2 pathways to positive qualities and that each person can construct a personal model to build a desired quality drawing on strengths already in evidence. And I think this approach is very useful when working with young adults, especially since a lot of young adults can deal with depression and anxiety, and really you can apply this model to anything because you meet the clients where they are. And I think that's what's so interesting about strength-based, because it helps develop a positive relationship as well as the client becomes aware of their own strengths and they are the ones identifying them. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, that the research from Podesky and Mooney and using the strength-based cognitive behavioral therapy is kind of an overall suggestion for practitioners. This research wasn't necessarily applied to young adults, but I still think that it can be very effective and meet the needs of young adults. Also, strength-based cognitive behavioral therapy can be used at a prevention and intervention level for clients. I think it can be really used at any phase or any stage of the client's life, and I think that's why this theory is so useful, especially in relation to young adults, because you meet the client where they are. So as I mentioned, the research by Podesky and Mooney doesn't necessarily study young adults, but I really feel that it can be used to benefit young adults. So as a whole, we were talking about different factors for program development and future areas of research for young adults. And we were discussing that intervention methods that were tried previously when working with young adults were a heavy use of medication, and this was on issues surrounding depression and anxiety. And now we're starting to see in the healthcare industry a change, and more practitioners are going towards this holistic approach where the young person is including that interpersonal approach and taking a look at themselves and what they want to accomplish. And it's also important to recognize that when you're developing program development and factors, that you must recognize risk factors and symptoms that may harm the young adult. And this can be including depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and spotting those symptoms early on for successful treatment. Here we have some community resources. We have on the right-hand side the local community resources for Atlanta, and on the left-hand side we have the national community resources. So first I wanted to start off with our own local resources that we have here in Atlanta. United Way has a fabulous website that helps connect people to their community partnerships. And they also have their 211 hotline that you can contact at any time of the day. Both the website and the hotline do a really good job of connecting people with resources for housing, clothing, food, and hundreds of other services that they may need. There's also the Georgia Crisis and Access Line, and you can contact that number 24 hours out of the day, and you can also use their website. And lastly, Grady has their own psychiatric emergency clinic for adults, and the numbers listed below. And like I said, these are just a few of the many resources that are out in Atlanta. There's also national community resources like the Suicide Prevention Hotline, and their numbers listed, and it's a 24-hour hotline as well. Then there's the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Their hours are more restricted, but they do have a website that you can access at any time. There's also the Peer Support Warm Line, which is 24/7, and then I listed the website for the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force.
Future studies on the role of social work in a young adult's life need to be conducted. There should be additional demographic resources on young adults raising children and how they engage with the community. When researching for practice recommendations on working with this demographic, there was not much information available to help the group as a whole. However, there was research on specific issues and how to treat those, but still, this information was limited. It was difficult to find practice recommendations, therefore, this area should be further studied. Future research should also include reasons for an increase in risk factors for depression and anxiety. Research on what factors are viewed to be transition point to adulthood would be helpful. We believe the gaps in the literature that should be addressed is how young people can better protect themselves to promote healthy practices. We also think there should be more programs and policies in place by the government as a whole to address development and implementation of natural health for adolescents to promote physical and mental health. According to King and Rukama, recent laws have allowed some foster care residents to stay in care past the age of 18. The majority of these residents will be those with developmental disabilities and those who have not graduated from high school. Because of the recent changes, there are no studies correlating the outcome between children aging out of foster care at 18 and those who choose to stay longer. Future research in this study could prove to be beneficial in decreasing the likelihood for risky behavior for foster care youth. Here you'll find a list of references used throughout this PowerPoint presentation. This concludes our PowerPoint presentation on young adulthood. We hope you enjoyed.